So, my favorite local bookstore, Lassley's Paperback Exchange, in fact, the only remaining local bookstore, has closed its doors now after being open for apparently 30 years. I only got to enjoy it for 5 years. And they had these handy bookmarks that looked like this, most of which refer to other locations, which haven't been in existence for quite some time. They used to have one, so in West Olympia, which was the first one I went to, and there was another one in Sheldon. I've been collecting their bookmarks for quite some time. They're yellow, they're lovely, useful. In their last days, they had a blowout sale where books that were normally at prices starting at I think $1.50 and upwards, depending on what the original price was. They had a system for that. Those books were down to 50 cents a piece, which is kind of hard to resist. So I went in and I took advantage of the sale, depressed though I was. First off, I'm going to show you some of the stuff I purchased. Some of these were just really random because they were 50-cent books. And sometimes I collect stuff that's pretty thoroughly random, even if, to be fair, I may actually never read it. So right here is A Student's Guide to 50 European Novels. Right? It's a little bit older, not the most recent, so that appeals in itself. You can see how it has the lovely yellow-colored spine. That's not a thing they really do anymore. They used to spray vegetable dye on the spines of books, make them red or green. I figure that I'll never read this in its entirety, but it may be just a nice resource. The next of the totally random, somewhat useless category is 2 different Edgar Cayce books. I don't know if you know who Edgar Cayce was. He was known as the Sleeping Clairvoyant. He was essentially one of those quote-unquote psychic charlatans. At least as near as I can tell, from I think, basically mostly from the 30s. I think most of the books about him from later on, when this stuff became popular second time around in like the self-help age of the 60s and the 70s. I think his son edited and published a lot of that stuff. But yeah, to this day, people are eating his stuff up. I kind of categorize him over near like Eric von Daniken, another guy whose stuff I collect that's questionable, you might say. But entertaining. In the bargain, I got some basically classic volumes here. This looks like a British edition for Lost Horizon by James Hilton. Interesting thing about this one is that the back of the book promotes the Shangri-La Hotel, from Western International Hotels. That made me wonder whether or not the author, James Hilton, had anything to do with Hilton Hotels. He doesn't. It's a coincidence, but I thought that was adorably, cheesy thing to do. We got a Dr. Dolittle volume here, Dr. Dolittle's Post Office from Hugh Lofting. This... a little battered, but look at this adorable way this book is packaged. It's sort of like wallpaper on both sides. There's no description whatsoever. Like on a newsstand, that might have even been wrapped in plastic initially. You get a sense of the antiquity of that one there. Even though the book itself is much older. Dover Thrift Edition here, very bare bones Dover. Let's see. Although it still has the recommendations on the back page, which I can't get enough of. It's Rudyard Kipling, The Man Who Would Be King, which made a very good movie by John Huston in the mid-70s with Connery and Michael Caine. I could do a better Michael Caine than that. And Samuel Johnson, History of Raselius, Prince of Abyssinia. This just looks like some, old world type of stuff. I didn't know a whole lot about this one before I grabbed it. I went and, looked it up on my phone right quick before making the purchase. I'm sure I will read that at some point. It just looks irresistible. Also, it has this used sticker on it, so it's been around a few used bookstores, probably from libraries and such. We got some cooler stuff here. We got a Jack Williamson. This claims to be fantasy masterwork right here. So this packaging is kind of unfortunate. You look at it at a great distance, like that. It looks like it may be like a more respectable printing. Then you get it all up close and you see the gloss and that in there. The inside's not too unfortunate. I'm going to imagine that's going to be a somewhat entertaining sci-fi fantasy, which is closer to the era that I prefer. Here we got Kenneth Robeson, The Frosted Death from The Avengers. So Kenneth Robeson is Lester Dent. Lester Dent, the creator of Doc Savage. This is another series from him, and you can see it's let's see here, what's that? The new Paperbacks Library, 75 cents originally. I just love these old series things from around that time period. Let's take a look here. What year is this printing? Yeah, okay, that's from 72. So that's the time to really get your pulp reprint material, because it's in actual pocket paperback form rather than trying to replicate the size of the magazine. So highly readable, and I'm sure it's going to be the kind of entertainment that I generally crave. Got a couple from the old-timey bestseller category. David Morrell, author of First Blood. Here's his first foray into horror novels, The Totem. I looked him up on Goodreads and found out that he did a whole series of sort of horror fantasy stuff later on in this century, centering around the Thomas de Quincey, the actual historical personages of Thomas de Quincey. I guess solving, fantastical and horrific detective situations here. And Fleming, You Only Live Twice. I love the old Bond movies. I haven't been such a huge fan of Fleming's writing in terms of what I've actually read. This book has almost nothing to do with the finished film. That was a screenplay by Roald Dahl, and I more or less probably rescued it, but I still kind of had to pick it up. I don't generally collect Fleming, but I also had On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which was another fantastic film in the series. So that might be worth the look just to compare, But also, not a bad edition, too. Check this out on the back. It's got a Chiquita sticker stuck to it, but, that's pretty tasty for me, And it's got a promo for The Man with the Golden Gun, which is the last book that Fleming wrote, and that's one of the ones that I actually tried to read at length, and I gave up because it was just so stuffy. In recent years, I have been collecting Westerns. I haven't actually gotten around to reading any of them. The only closest thing to Western that I've read is like Robert E. Howard's forays into it, and I think he's a little different from most. But these are Max Brand right here. Well, this one's Max Brand, 2 6s. The printing is like an 80s printing, so it's not the greatest example of what this book, might look like. You can see fairly typical the way text is presented. This Leisure Books imprint there. Yeah, $5 originally. That's highway robbery. And this is a pretty cool Zane Grey edition right there. This is actually the third one I found in this series. Some of which I actually found at a gas station of all places. They had these old 60s era paperbacks of Zane Grey at a gas station, in the middle of nowhere, like on Highway 8. But that's Light of the Western Stars. Let's take a look here. You can see it's a little bit water damaged, which is probably why it was still remaining. But yeah, written in 13, and I'm always digging fiction written before the 40s. And this one, I think, is nonfiction or intended as nonfiction. Ghosts of the Golden West by Hans Holzer. So that may provide some entertainment, and you can see it's a pretty good era for the edition of that. I believe that's also an early 70s thing right there. That's from Ace. Who put out a lot of lovely genre fiction. Okay, that's from '68. Yeah, so that's pretty much right in the sweet spot there for what a paperback novel should look like. They've always had a whole slew of these Alfred Hitchcock Presents collections. I've only really gotten into one of them, Sinister Spies, which I think is actually separate from the series, but is also edited by Hitchcock, or claims to have been edited by Hitchcock. My brother believes that none of them were, and he just put his name on it. Maybe so, but it's still fun that the connection is there. And some of the authors who wind up in these are worth the look anyway, although I don't see anybody I recognize on this particular one. But we have Get Me to the Wake on Time, Stories My Mother Never Told Me. And this differs from the other two because Hitchcock's face isn't presented on it, but you see a lovely stylized Hitchcock logo there. Murders on the Half Skull, and I think that's either actually some Hieronymus Bosch there or somebody doing an excellent take on him. I actually looked through on the book, and it doesn't credit a cover artist there, so it's probably just some designer who got some free public domain art. Next category is a little hefty, so we're going to take them on slow. They had a whole bunch of John Jakes. John Jakes, for me, is significant because he created Brak the Barbarian. They were Conan knockoffs, and he admitted it, and they read pretty well when you consider it that way. These are Signet. Signet really likes to do the lurid thing when it comes to their paperback publication. This is a plug for the Shining. Here is Asylum World. Some of these were staring me at the face there for years, but I figured since they were only 50 cents, it'd be a good time to, finally just pick them up. The Secrets of Stardeep. I don't know how hard sci-fi the guy would like to have gotten with his more space-related work. I'm hoping he kept it fun and fantastical. But Jakes was kind of a multi-genre guy because he's more famous outside of the sci-fi fantasy genre for writing the North and South series, which got made into a huge miniseries with Swayze, I think, in the 80s. So, the historical fiction, obviously another big selling point for him. Kind of like Robert E. Howard in that regard, but I haven't read enough varied other John Jakes stuff to really have a full understanding of how he is as an author on the whole. I'm just hoping he's really awesome. More science fiction, fantasy stuff in here. We're going to start out with this really sweet late 70s post-Star Wars cover, the Eternity Brigade. Just check that out, with the blue laser letters shooting down the protagonist people here, under some sci-fi style debris. It's pretty sweet, and you can see the logo better featured there on the back. I don't know a whole lot about this. I think it's either from 77 or 7. No, it's 80. It's 80, but that's still in the post Star Wars wake there. This is probably going to be garbage in terms of the actual writing. It's probably not going to be my kind of genre stuff. It's going to be more 70s stuff, a little more sex stuff. I expect, I really don't know fully what I'm getting into here, but that cover is irresistible. Judith Merrill, Sci-Fi, The Best of the Best, Part 1. Lovely cover on there. Objectively, he's kind of terrible. You can tell that he's having fun, but he isn't really interested in making the reader have fun. But that's The City Outside the World. Yeah, I think I know exactly how that's going to go. See, we got I think this is a 50s one right here, No Man of Earth by Walter Moody. This is another one that was staring me in the face there a long time. Great period back cover there. That looks more 60s now that I get a better look at it. But you see the illustration style there with a kind of abstractified pastel or charcoal look to it. I don't know, maybe that'll be fun. Ruth Nichols, A Walk Out of the World. Looks like some sort of traditionalist post-Tolkien fantasy there. They're being faced with gargoyles or whatever, One magical day they vanished from home and found the place where they really belonged, Wyman Gwynn, Beyond Bedlam. Neat cover, if nothing else. Don't know. Let's see, that's 8 brilliant short stories from a master of sci-fi. Don't know a thing about Gwyn. I think the real reason I went for this one is because the copyright dates for the stories were all from back in the 50s. Maybe there'll still be some fun and liveliness in there. This is a laser book right here. There were a whole series of these. These were science fiction books commissioned by Harlequin, the same company that did Harlequin Romances. This is laser books number 5. They're all numbered. You can see they're all painted in this style, this sort of Kelly Freas type of style. Stylized, a lot of fun. You can see it's playful. I don't know if you're really getting the color there, but there's fun use of color in those. And inside the flap there, where there's usually nothing, there's this magenta line thing telling you about all the other laser books you could be getting. Let's see, Walls Within Walls. Okay, that cover is by Kelly Freas, and that's by Arthur Toft, who I don't know a lot about. But yeah, mid-70s. That's when that series was taking place. I have a friend who collects quite a few of those. Unicorns, edited by Jack Dan and Gardner Dezoy here. Normally, I wouldn't necessarily run to something like this. It is Ace. But if you look at... let's see, get a more comprehensive look at who the authors are here. Okay, so we got Sturgeon, DeCamp, Niven, Harlan Ellison, Thomas Burnett Swan, who I've been collecting and meaning to read. I haven't read him yet. Stephen R. Donaldson, not exactly running to that one. Ursula Gwynn, Zelazny. And on the back here we get actually T.H. White, author of The Once and Future King, and Gene Wolfe, they're of frickin' Shadow of the Torturer. So it's about unicorns, but there's some good writers in here. Besides, I heard unicorns are awesome. And The Space Barbarians by Tom Godwin, author of Space Prison. Assume it's a sequel to that, possibly. Pyramid Books there, who did some of the Shadow reprints from the 60s and 70s. Great back cover here, plugging another book, Three Worlds to Conquer. And back there, that's the cover illustration, just restated, in blue, halftone kind of thing. Oh, and somebody really wanted to mark this page. We'll find that out if I ever read this. Read about this one a little bit from some of my fellow readers on Goodreads. They didn't think too highly of it. But maybe it'll be a fun throwaway, God only knows. But that concludes the last gasp of what I got from Lassley's. I got in there on 3 different weekends to exploit the sale and just sort of take a last look at the place and say goodbye. And I actually went on a trip to California, and on the day I got back, I just missed a voicemail from my friend telling me that it was the final day and that they were selling off the shelving. And I really would have liked to got in for that, but even if I'd heard the voicemail before midnight, which it wasn't until after midnight that I heard it, I really wouldn't have had the energy to do much of any, because I was all blown out from having air traveled. And I had the feeling I probably would have missed their final day too. But yeah, no, I feel like I made a pretty good account for myself given the circumstances, the time I had left. But that was my haul. Whoops, from Lassley's. If it was still open, I'd be telling you to go over there because it's a fascinating place. A great mass of books. Like any other used bookstore, you never really know what'll turn up, and a lot of really random stuff did over the years. So I think Probably at least half of my collection probably came from there. That was Lassley's, and that's it for now.